Zora and Me, Chapter 24. We walked in silence, the weight of our knowledge hanging on our shoulders like wet wool blankets. We still didn't know about gold, and we still didn't have a glimmer of an idea of what to do with what we knew about gold and ivory and poor Mr. Pender. Without paying much attention at all, we made our way to a nearby lagoon. We sat on the edge of the lagoon braiding moss. A cheerful whistling hit our backs. It was old Mr. Ambrose coming to fish. "Afternoon, Mr. Ambrose," we said. "Afternoon, ladies." "Oh, Mr. Ambrose, did you get my letter?" Zora asked. "Yes, I did, Snidlets." "Thank you so much for that beautiful book," she said. "I never got such a nice gift." "Well, it was my pleasure. Was it everything you'd hoped it would be?" "Oh, yes, it—" Zora shot me an apologetic look, like she was saying sorry for pretending that things were fine, but she didn't have to. I understood. White lies. "And it everything you could ever want to know about gators and gator kings?" "Yes, and everything about gator kings, too." Mr. Ambrose looked at her. "Mm-hmm. Why's your face so long?" "Oh, no reason." Zora's voice was so hollow it couldn't have convinced a stranger, let alone someone who'd known her since before she knew herself. He recognized her ailment exactly. "There are two kinds of hearts," he said after a time. "There's the ones that don't got nothing in them, and there's others that need to pour their feelings out. Now, since I know you got a mighty strong light beatin' in your chest, why don't you tell me what's weighing on you?" By this time the old man was sitting beside Zora. His sunburned face was etched with craggy, honest lines. Zora's eyes got glassy. The agony of having to decide what to do cut her. I knew Zora almost better than I knew myself, but I wasn't sure whether she was going to tell the old man what she learned between Gold and Joe Clark or not. Mr. Ambrose was definitely an ally, but he was also white. "How do you know we can trust someone?" Zora asked. Of course the old man knew what Zora was asking, whether or not she could trust him. He met her eyes. "When you help bring a person into this world, Snidlets, you have a bond. Most folks meet after they've been around for a while, maybe seen a little too much, but when we met, Snidlets, you were brand spanking new. Whenever I look at your face, I can't help but see you as a baby. With a person who can see your baby self, you don't have anything to be afraid of. The folks you have in your mind as bundles in their mother's arms, and you always want to keep safe. Always." Zora trusted this old white man, and I was pretty sure I did too. "It's just that I don't want anyone to get hung from a tree," Zora blurted out. I don't think she had even considered such a thing possible until she said it, but that was the largest portion of Zora's burden, her knowledge and the power that gave her, the power to have a hand in hurting someone. "Snidlets, I don't want that to happen either," Mr. Ambrose said, wearing a look more troubled than it was curious. That distinction mattered. Zora told Mr. Ambrose everything she heard at the Loving Pine, and she finally began to cry. The old man became stiff. He wanted to comfort her, but didn't quite know how. He looked like he was going to hug her, but then had a better idea. Mr. Ambrose reached into his front pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He offered it to Zora gently, but she was so soaked with sorrow that the gesture was lost on her. We all stared gloomily at the pine needles and leaves floating atop the lagoon. I don't know how to explain that moment except to say that, before the moving pictures and before the radio, folks were accustomed to silence. We even used to hug up on it once in a while. I never thought of it as a special then, but then we just sit and stare and luxuriate in the comfort of our own thoughts. Without time to think, we wouldn't have had anything to talk about in the first place. But the time it took for Mr. Ambrose to speak up again felt long, even for them. "Only very special people can put real-life puzzles with human pieces together," he finally said. "You're one of those folks, Snidlets. You got a brain in your head there ain't no match for, way smarter than algebra. You also got the feelings in your gut to go with it. It's a gift for you to share. Don't be stingy with what you know, but be sure of the folks you're sharing it with. You did the right thing by telling me and not too many other folks." "I think so," Zora agreed. "But I'm scared." "Only a fool," he answered, "wouldn't be terrified by the weight of what you know and what you feel. From the day I met you I thought you could become a lot of things. A fool wasn't one of them." The air vibrated around us. It felt like a christening or baptism, but choirs and a preacher and pews weren't necessary. Mr. Ambrose had just showed Zora to her seat of power, and it wasn't in a back row. "I'm sending you on a very important mission," Mr. Ambrose said. "Go to Joe Clark and tell him everything you heard. Don't hold anything back. Also, tell him that you told me, and that I respect him very much. Say I know that he will make sure justice is done in Eatonville, the same as I will make sure justice is done in Lake Matland." The old man gathered the fishing gear he never set up and headed home. Zora and I walked away from the lagoon lighter in step than we had arrived. Having great responsibility was one thing, knowing what to do with it was another, and though we hadn't gone far from home, neither of us returned the same girls we had been when we left.